nonprofit, and we need your support financially and spiritually. And I'm going to hand it over to Henry Euler, who organized much of the event. Thank you, Henry.
No pressure. Thank you, Paul. Thank you. Okay, I guess we'll start with an opening statement from each candidate, and we'll start with Dennis Safran, since his name comes first in the alphabet.
That's unusual. Thank you very much, Henry, and thank you very much, Paul. It's good to be back here. I was here with 4 of the other candidates, the other Democratic candidates, about 7 weeks ago. I want to, since Paul was not here at the time, I want to welcome him here and hope we can continue the discussion that Chrissy Voskerichian and Paul Graziano and Austin Shaffron and John Duane and I had at that time about the preservation issues and anything else the audience or the moderators want to bring up. Brief synopsis with me. I live in Douglaston with my wife Jane and our 2 kids, one of whom is also my campaign staffer, Nick Safran, taking a semester off from school. We raised our kids there. I'm on the board of I'm the vice president of the Douglaston Civic Association. Jane is on the board of the Local Development Corporation, the Douglaston Historical, so we are very active in community activities in general, and particularly in Jane's case in preservation and historical activities. So this is like being home for us. I also, while I've worked locally, I've also worked nationally in the 90s. In the early part of the last decade, I ran a national anti-crime group that worked for a lot of what Rudy Giuliani and similar mayors did to lower the violent crime rate and work to improve neighborhood quality of life. And I really want to make sure we keep that up here in Northeast Queens. 30 seconds. So I just want to say, obviously the focus here is on development, which is another major quality of life issue, just like crime and just like squeegee men. And I'm proud to have the support of Paul Graziano, who of course is probably the preeminent preservationist and foe of development. And I think one thing we should talk about is the fact that my opponent has the backing of the real estate board PAC that poured $360,000 into his primary campaign against his opponent.
I should have mentioned that it was a 2-minute opening statement.
Let's make it 2.5.
That's okay. Henry, Paul, good to see everyone. My name is Paul Malone, and I'm running to be your New York City Councilman right here in District 19. I think what's important and what we're saying is what's the best way to get the district the respect and the funding it deserves, to keep these societies going, to keep our interests here in this community. That starts first by getting back our city council office from the disgrace that it is right now. We are facing a councilman that's under indictment. We are last in funding, and we are a laughing stock within the city. Our campaign has been talking about bringing together the district, to uniting it. How does one do that? It's one thing to say it through words. It's another thing when you bring everyone together. So when we walked in the parade last week, we walked last week as an ambassador of the Columbus Day Parade. We worked with Bill de Blasio. We walked with Andrew Cuomo. And they said, Paul, we look forward to walking with you, and what can we do with your district? That's so important. We walked as a marshal in the Korean Day Parade last week, and Ron Kim and Grace Meng said, Paul, we look forward to walking with you and with your district. The entire Queens Democratic Party, the Independent Party, our governors, our senators, our congressmen, our elected officials are standing with our campaign. The entire Police Benevolent Association. Pat Lynch came back to our office last week and said to everyone at our Clinton Club meeting, the entire police force of the city of New York is behind Paul Malone and his family for their tireless efforts to keep us safe. The UFT was in our office last week and is now calling all of their members to say the UFT is with us. Every labor enforcement, every law enforcement, almost every union in the city of New York and elected official is standing with our campaign. That's how you unite a district. That's how you bring strength to a district. That's how you represent everyone in the district. We have a coalition of every ethnic area in our district, from Greek, Korean, Chinese, Italian, Greek, Jewish, Spanish. We have every leader standing with us, meeting with us daily on issues within the community. And that's what we look forward to in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Historical Society to ask the candidates this evening, and each candidate receives a copy of those questions before the forum tonight. So the first question, we'll start with Paul Malone, and then we'll switch to Dennis to answer. This question says, in the Auburndale section of Queens, residents are asking for a section of the Station Road community to be rezoned from manufacturing to residential. In addition, some residents are calling for a new zoning designation for single-family, attached, and semi-attached homes. How will you help these residents achieve these goals? Paul, we'll start with you.
Sure. I think look at that. I know it's a process that Chrissy and Paul have been involved with very much, and it's something we should look into very quickly again. The area there, you're talking about a manufacturing district there in Auburndale that was tried to rezone back into a residential, which did not happen. We need to get that back on the table. What that would do is once again preserve our quality of life and fight for those living there, tired of the automobile shops, tired of the manufacturing shops there, so that in the future, if someone were to purchase those lots, they no longer could stay as a manufacturer. And absolutely, for our row housing and those special one families that you find there, I know once again Paul's been working hard to find that new special designation for them, and that must be done. And that's another way to protect, and that's citywide. So when you do the code, you're talking about a citywide designation. There is a thriving community there with that type of house, and we need to protect that. So we would support them.
Thank you. Dennis?
Thanks, Henry. I was just discussing, after I got the questions earlier today, I was just discussing that with Chrissy because she's really the expert on that area in particular. And first, it's two different issues. First of all, as to the as to downzoning, what's currently zoned for manufacturing, the community fought for that. Unfortunately, they didn't get it in the round of downzoning that Paul Graziano and Senator Avila worked on. Certainly, we're going to continue to try, but the more important thing realistically now, since even if we got a downzoning of where Nissan is now, where Helms Brothers is now, of course, they'd be grandfathered in. What's more important, and what Chrissy has led the community uprising on, is that they have these current entities, Nissan, Helm, they have to be held to comply with all codes such as noise pollution. They've got to be, we got to come down on like a ton of bricks if they go and chop down trees like they did earlier this year. I was proud to go, even though Chrissy and I were both potential opponents at that time, to stand with her and Rio Gorman at the news conference they held outside Nissan Brothers. So I will certainly work to make sure that we keep these businesses in compliance with all other codes. As to the current R3A, the single-family and detached single-family houses, we do have to work for that zoning change so we don't get multi-family houses there.
Thank you, Dennis. Next question, we'll start with Dennis. Dennis, Bill de Blasio recently said that he would favor making illegal conversions legal. A New York Times article stated that Council member Brad Lander is proposing legislation to accomplish this goal. Explain why you would either support or oppose this proposal.
I would strongly oppose it. I think this is, particularly in our neighborhood, in our community. I understand we may have to make accommodations in other council districts, but in our district in particular, where we are fighting to preserve the very special residential quality of life we have here, we cannot have illegal conversions. We should be going the other way and cracking down on them, not opening the floodgates. And it's very interesting, as you say, this is what Bill de Blasio is proposing. Paul just proudly said, I marched in the parade with Bill de Blasio. Bill de Blasio, I'm going to be his guy. It is interesting that at this time of justified anger and cynicism about politics, my opponent seems to be proudly running as the insider. Now, sometimes you can't be that. It's a very careful balancing act for an elected official. How much do you speak up, speak truth to power? How much do you fight, and how much do you go along? It's interesting that he's also he's criticized Tony Avila for not going along enough. Maybe Tony sometimes struck the wrong balance on that. Maybe he was too much of an activist, too much of a firebrand. But it is a delicate balance, and it's interesting that Paul is bragging that he won't even try to strike the balance. He's just going to be de Blasio's guy. And this issue illustrates why sometimes you just have to stand up to the mayor. Another issue, while Paul proudly says he marched in the Korean Day Parade, Mr. de Blasio is also proposing proudly to gut New York's specialized high school. Nothing would be a greater attack on the Korean and Chinese communities than gutting merit selection at these high schools that our Asian immigrants literally come from around the world to send their children to. We got to stand up to Bill de Blasio and say no illegal conversions and hands off Stuyvesant High School and Bronx Science.
Paul, would you answer that, please?
Yeah, that's an easy question. No one's ever going to support illegal conversions, and that's never going to happen. And it's very interesting that Dennis, looking from the outside, says that we have to support, because when you don't have any support, you have to say that. And that's clearly a big, big focus. Any candidate, and now you're down to two, that's going to stand in front of you, you have to ask them, what have you done in this district for the last 10 years? Who is standing with you? And what is your plan to get it done in the future? I hear nothing but attacks, once again, on our campaign. If you look back from 2009 to today, the only candidate who has not released a negative piece is us. That's something else that Dennis and I have in common. He's a lawyer, I'm a lawyer. He practices in Nassau County, I Flushing and Flushing. We are officers of the court. We are bound by the canon ethics. If you knowingly state something that is untrue, you can lose your license. And Dennis is very, very close. Because now at this point, he is attacking me by saying, I released and I have received. None of the sort. That despicable ad that came out, by the way, by Jobs for New York, which we denounced, which decided to throw this horrible picture of the Connecticut children that we denounced, nothing to do with our campaign. What does it say from Dennis? Paul Balone released this. What does it say from Dennis? Balone sent this shocking flyer, reprinted, paid for by Jobs for New York. That is a crime by Dennis himself. That is something that Dennis can lose his law license for. You knowingly know it's not true, and yet you purport it for your own interests, just because it's another one of those candidates that will say anything to win. We are done with that. And this is the time for our district to stand up and say, enough! Enough of the nonsense. When everyone stands together, that's when it's time to say something. Thank you very much. Well, apparently all you do is attack me down. Please respond.
All right.
With Henry's permission and Paul's permission, Paul, I would urge you to file a complaint with the bar, with the disciplinary committee at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. You can also lose your license. Yeah, you can also lose your license for frivolous complaints. And to stand up there childishly and say, "Oh, I had nothing to do with this." A fairy godmother came along and spent $360,000 on my campaign, putting out negative advertisements, denouncing my opponents, exploiting a memorial to dead children, but I had nothing to do with it. Well, now I'll denounce it. The only effective way of denouncing it is to renounce their support and to also announce that since I have been put in a compromised position by having $360,000 spent on my behalf by the real estate board, then I will just have to recuse myself from every vote on legislation that they take a position on. That's the only way you can effectively denounce that, Paul, and I would urge you to say this tonight.
Okay. Well, I don't know how many more times you can say the same thing, but sometimes people don't want to listen. When you renounce, you renounce. Dennis, at the next debate, which is in about 15 minutes, you're going to ask the same question, you're going to get the same answer. The debate after that in an hour, you're going to get the same answer. And the debate after that, when you find out who's supporting who, you're going to get the same answer. We have denounced all outside organizations, including Jobs for New York, and it doesn't matter how many times you say it, you're still going to hear it. Does that help anything in District 19, by the way? Does that talk about all our planes flying overboard, our police departments being hammered, our parks being shortchanged, the lack of funds in this district? Does that address any of that? Or is it the same political nonsense that we're tired of? Does it come from the same side that just shut our government down? Does it came from the same side that's now currently indicted and going places that we don't want to go? That's where this is coming from. Our campaign, and the first funds they receive, that's what they mail to you. Nothing about the issues in the district, nothing that they stand for, nothing that they want to do to bring together this district. Can you even name me a Korean leader? Or one that's with you? Because you want to support their issues?
No, I'm not the candidate.
Thank you very much. None. Because you got them, and you don't even know it. You don't even know
I
one.
won't name every name. Well, can you name one Korean, Paul?
No Korean, I can
I'll
name the
name-
entire community.
Do you know anyone who attends Stuyvesant or Bronx
Not
Science?
one Korean leader can he nominate, not one. I'll say
Okay, guys, thank you.
not
Let's
one.
move on. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question, what should be done, if anything, when the community board and borough president disapprove a variance or other land use proposal, and the Board of Standards and Appeals approves it? And we'll start with Paul.
Well, the BSA is controlled by the mayor. You have appointments, 5 of them that are all appointed by the mayor. So how do we change this? Right, we always talk about mayoral control on so many different things, whether it's schools, whether it's the school construction authority, whether it's the BSA. We have people who serve on community boards that have real estate experience, and when we sit there in front of Community Board 7, and many of us are on Community Board 7 or 11 here, and we vote unanimously against something, and time again, we see the BSA do something opposed or in direct opposition to what we do. It's beyond frustrating. It's very, very upsetting. But the BSA is its own governed body. So the only way we can change this or make effective change is to change the appointment process. We've been saying that from the beginning. Open it up to the borough president. Open it up to the community. That's how we'll have a say. But in addition to that, you have to have a relationship, because they're still going to be in existence, whoever wins. Come January 1st, guess who's going to be there? The BSA. So we will form a relationship with them. We'll ask them for a meeting. We'll sit down. We'll bring our community leaders and say, this is what we're for, this is what we're against. Can you listen to us? Can you have a dialogue with us? And when we need extra help, guess who I'm going to call? Every elected official and person that's standing with us. You put the pressure on them. Because with pressure, with community standing together, and everyone, I have an army of people I can call to put pressure on the BSA. And that's how you do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis.
The city council has to be re-involved in this process. Under the old charter, the Board of Estimates that preceded the city council had ultimate veto authority over the land use decisions. They should be brought back into the process. My understanding is it was thought that this politicized it to have the city council as the final arbiter. Well, sometimes politicization is another word for democracy. That's the way we get the input of the community in, and ultimately, final votes should go before the council to approve what the BSA, what actions the BSA has taken. Calling an army of people, once again running as Mr. Insider, calling an army of people, for example, isn't going to help when Mayor de Blasio says he wants to approve illegal conversions. Bringing all the leaders you want to sit down with him, sorry, he's pledged himself to other interest groups, and that's not the way we're not going to get him to change his mind because Paul smiles a nice smile. Sometimes you have to stand up to authority. Similarly, that's the only way we are going to preserve our specialized schools. And it's the only way we're going to stand up to the real estate board. So you can't just be Mr. Insider, but I will certainly propose legislation to give the council a role in this, in the land use decision-making process. And I think that legislation will have a chance of passage because I think city councilmen from across the spectrum would want to have some say in the process.
Thank you, Dennis. The next question, we'll start with Dennis. What can be done to ensure that the Buildings Department enforces zoning and building regulations on a consistent basis?
On this one, I think you have to phone jockey a lot. Sometimes you have to be a pain in the neck with the Buildings Department, as I think Tony Avella was for 8 years, and I give him credit. I lost a hard-fought race to Tony, but I think he did a good job, and I think he expressed the frustration, the understandable frustration and outrage of this community at the Buildings Department. If there's legislation that's required, I would explore that. I want to sit down and look at what legislative changes are appropriate to try to get more effective response from the buildings department, to try to get them to be more responsive to cracking down on violations. But I would again stress, if Mayor de Blasio is going to say that illegal conversions are suddenly poof not illegal, well, that's one major thing where we've been trying to get the buildings department to enforce, that there'll be nothing for them to enforce. So we've got to stand up to that and say this community is going to fight tooth and nail against any such proposal.
Thank you. Paul?
Well, let's hope we have the opportunity come this new year with the new commissioner of the building department. There's frustration everywhere. There's frustration from homeowners who want to do a simple kitchen, from frustration to a community that sees a home just knocked down overnight, and we find out that someone just got a permit and self-certified. So one of the ways to stop it is to stop the self-certification process. So someone can't just go to the building department and just go get their own permit and knock something down. That's how we control things. If we can stop the architect or developer or someone or a builder to get in there and say, I'm just going to take this wall down, and we wake up tomorrow, and how many times do we see, especially when we fight in the Broadway Flushing homeowners area or any place else that's looking for a landmark designation, to see a place torn down. So if we stop the self-certification process, we'll stop the ability for people skirting the enforcement by the building department. That would be a big, big step. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. The next question, we'll start with Paul. Funds for cultural institutions like the Pappenhusen Institute, Alipon Environmental Center, and the Bayside Historical Society, and other nonprofits have been cut off by the state. What would you do to help these and other nonprofit institutions?
Well, they've been cut off by the state, but they haven't been cut off by the city. So what is one of the jobs, and probably the most important job of a city council person, is to bring back the funding and the resources to the district. There's two types. There's capital funding, and then there's your discretionary funding. Through these funds, we can support these critical cultural institutions. You can participate in the participatory budget process. You can regain the many, many millions of dollars that have been lost. We have been either last or in the bottom 5 in the district in bringing back funding. How does that help? We pay some of the highest taxes in the city. It's called getting your fair share. If we can't get back from the city all the things we pay for, how can we help our cultural institutions, our teachers, our schools, our police department, our parks? So that's the first and foremost job that we speak about if we're honored enough to be the city council, is to bring back resources to protect these groups.
Thank you. Dennis?
I strongly support funding for these institutions. Pappenhusen is just a wonderful local resource and really a citywide resource. I strongly support it. The only thing that Dan Halloran did that was right is joining 10 or 15 other councilmen who did participatory budgeting. I certainly support a continuation. I'm going to participate in participatory budgeting as your councilman. And as you know, Pappenhusen won that, but I think they finished first as one of the projects that was funded by discretionary funds. It is interesting, though, that while Paul talks about getting our fair share of discretionary funding, he told the Manhattan Interest Group, pledged to them that he would support redistribution of discretionary funding away from our district to so-called poorer districts throughout the city. I strongly oppose that. I may have lost the support of that interest group because I said that our community members, while they're derided by some of the Manhattan elite as being, quote, affluent, all my neighbors are far less affluent than that elite. And that is something I could not agree with and would not pledge to go along with. I'm very disappointed that Paul has pledged when, as he rightly says, we already get very little to give it away.